Hi, people. This is Glenn Maurer, and we're doing yet another episode of The Next Step. And where we here in Santa Barbara try to talk about issues of relevance to the environment and the community of Santa Barbara that we're a part of and the greater world. This show will be airing during what is called World Water Day, March 29th. It's the United Nations annual event trying to recognize the need for the world to attend to questions of water, sanitary provision of sanitary water, and the use of water in an appropriate way without the waste and filth that it attended so much of it, and also trying to make sure that it's equitably shared and available to the general public and not privately owned. But in California, strangely enough, we're starting to face some of these same problems that the world has suffered with for so many decades. A lot more demand on water in California than we saw not even 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of it coming from sources that have very little to do with actual people needs, with other more commercial aspects. We're in a drought in California, but we're always in a drought in California. It's a desert, and it's always been a problem in California. The old Mark Twain quote about water in California was fighting over, whereas whiskey was for drinking, and I think we know that. So with all that aside, we're going to be lucky today and have somebody who's going to help us understand this better. Carolee Krieger, who is the Executive Director and Founder of the California Water Impact Network. Welcome, Carolee.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you because you know more about water in California than anybody else I know.
Well,
so
I've been at it for a long time.
Yeah, well, you've done a great job, and I've seen your articles and other works, and I know that you're knowledgeable on the subject and appreciate that. We have a quick half hour or less to try to hit some of the highlights, and maybe we'll have to do a second episode if it doesn't allow us to do it in the time that we have. But tell us a little bit about what California Water Impact Network is, just to get started.
Well, the California Water Impact Network was founded by me and several other people, including Yvon Chouinard, the head of Patagonia, the clothing company. He lives in Ventura, and his wife, Melinda. And we founded it in 2001 as an organization to be viable to stop the privatization of the Kern Water Bank. That was the first thing that got me involved, was the Monterey Amendments and the potential privatization of California's water, which I'm totally opposed to.
Yeah, an issue that drives me a lot.
Yes,
and we're seeing that around the world.
We are, but we're also seeing it, as close as San Luis Obispo and even in Cuyama. So we have to be aware of that. But I'd like to start by telling your viewers, just showing your viewers a map that I brought, and I'll hold it up.
Yeah.
This is a map of California, and it's...
you can see, well, can we, bring it closer to you?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a typical map, a topographical type of map of California, showing us north-south.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it on its side, and I want your viewers to realize that all of the mountains in California, the central and northern California, the Sierra Nevadas and the Cascades all drain to the Delta.
Yeah.
The Delta is the most important part of our water system.
Where Carolee's finger is pointing right now is this blue spot of water, Bay Area down by San Francisco. And as you see, California, when you see it in this dimension, all the Sierra Nevada across the top, the Great Central Valley, all those rivers from Sacramento in the north to the San Joaquin in the south, and all that, they're all flowing out that way, out of this Great Central Valley and into the Delta area.
And that's why the Delta is so very vitally important for all of California. It's not something that most people understand, but when you see it this way, of course, gravity pulls all the water down from the mountains, the Sierras and the Cascades, and it comes right to the Delta. The Delta is the linchpin for most of California's water system, what gets exported south here.
So some of the water from California comes from the Colorado River, which is on the other end of the state.
That's true.
It doesn't have to do with this natural topography. This is completely
man-driven, right?
Man-driven and pumped, man-pumped.
Yes.
But we're now facing in California with this pressures we have is an attempt to try to move more of that Northern California water and Central California water out of that delta
Well, what the attempt is now is to build 2 tunnels here and have them go 35 miles under the delta, buried 150 feet underground. These 2 tunnels are each 40 feet wide, and they would run for 35 miles. 40 feet wide means each tunnel you could fly a Piper Cub in. They're
My goodness.
huge, and they run for 35 miles.
Well, let's stop and talk about that. Back in the back there, we have that pie chart. If we can get that up on the screen in a moment, and we can talk about it while it's coming. California, we have this fantasy in California, well, not fantasy, we have this lie, California water lies. And I think lie number 1 is this attempt to impose a sense of guilt on the general population. I see articles in the local newspapers saying we should only wash one side of our dinner plates to save water, or we have to feel guilty if we flush a toilet.
Well, Glenn, let me tell you a solid fact.
Yeah.
80 to 84% of the developed water in California is used by agriculture.
I want to get that chart up if we can do that.
Okay.
80
80 to
there it is right there.
84%. 80 to 84% is used by agriculture. Now, when they say, oh, but there's the environmental water and all that stuff, I'm not talking about
Let's not
that
talk
water.
about that. Let's
Right.
talk about this.
Water that's consumed by people.
Okay, number 1 lie is that we are, as consumers of water, lawns, showers, car
People,
washes,
right.
people, all these allegedly abusive things we do are only 8 or 12%, 8 to 12%.
That's it, that's all. So when the governor has mandated a 25% cutback for urban water users, which is what you're talking about, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the 80%, 80 to 84% of agriculture.
Even if the domestic commercial use that we see in this pie chart, that gold
Right.
section, even if it was 10 or 12%, a reduction of 25% is only 3% of the
That's right.
total water in California, demand in California.
Yet a reduction of 25% of the 80% is huge.
But the governor has refused to enforce such an
He has,
effort.
he has.
In
And
fact,
we think it's politics and the special interests, the greed of special interests who are controlling the politics of what's going on.
I have no doubt about it. The culprit that most people talk about in this, that on our side, or on my side, is the exportation of food products, which are a way of exporting California water.
That's one thing.
And
That is definitely one of the problems. Another of the major problems, which feeds into what you're saying, exporting crops, whether they be almonds or alfalfa,
Or rice.
But rice isn't as big a consumer as almonds or alfalfa. Those are the 2 top. But think of this, Glenn, 40% of that 80% that ag uses is delivered by flood irrigation,
Yeah,
which is the most wasteful.
I want to
way
get back
do
to
it.
this. So we're building, the governor proposes to build these big, huge tunnels under the
Yes.
water, a huge infrastructure problem.
Yes, huge.
And gosh knows what happens in time of earthquake, or, that's
Well,
one of the most seismically active
It's going
area.
through a seismically active
most likely,
area.
But that aside, and the purpose of this, though, this is what I want to get back to, is the purpose of building these
Tunnels.
airplane-sized tunnels to transport water is, most people's mind, it's because, oh my goodness, Southern California is desperate for water so that people can survive in this environment.
But it's really not about
Let's
people.
talk about where it's going.
It's going to agriculture, primarily to agriculture, but they're going to have the urban ratepayers pay for it. And that's one of the big bones of contention that we have. You have to understand that the governor started out saying that this was going to cost $4 billion. Then it was raised to $11 billion, and he's now at $17 billion. But that doesn't include any cost overruns or any mitigation measures.
And who does he propose is going to pay for this?
Supposedly, because there's no vote, it's going to be the users of the water. Now, agriculture doesn't want to pay the full share. They want us to subsidize them. So when you hear users of the water, think of your pocketbook, because we're going to be the ones asked to pay. Now, what you need to understand is this project, even after they started this in 2006, even 10 years later, it's only 10% engineered at this point, and the the farmers, the landowners in the Delta where these tunnels are being proposed have kept the state off the land, so they've never even done any core drillings. They have no idea how much this is going to cost.
I know this is such a complicated thing. I mean, we haven't touched, and we will just, I want the viewers to know that there's serious environmental consequences of diverting that much water out of the Delta.
Absolutely.
This is going to change the ecosystem of that Delta permanently.
It will kill the Delta. It means the extinction, very likely extinction of all 3 of the salmon runs. It means that there is very likely going to be saltwater intrusion from the San Francisco Bay that's going to affect all of the landowners in the Delta. The landowners, the farmers in the Delta, some of them have been farming for 120 years. I mean, they are some of the most senior water rights holders in this system. So the Delta will be decimated, and because of these tunnels are very expensive.
Right.
I mean, I was up to 17 billion, but it's much more likely going to cost upwards of $100 billion. And then when you need the water the most in drought, there's no water to put in them.
Well, it's the same problem we're facing now. Santa Barbara succumbed to the siren
Absolutely.
song of, we'll have state water, and that'll save Santa Barbara from ourselves, and we can then go back to building and doing all the growth that I
Well,
wanted to.
Glenn-
But they've oversubscribed the state water. They're going to oversubscribe this because when the drought happens, there won't be water for anybody to share.
As we're experiencing now with the State Water Project.
what I'm saying.
But what is so interesting about Santa Barbara is that the Coastal Branch was the most recent thing built by the state, by the Department of Water Resources. And before the election in 1991, when Santa Barbara voted to hook up to the State Water Project, we were told that it was going to cost $270 million. And we were told all over the ballot arguments it was 97% reliable. That turns out to be not true. The cost of construction is at $680 million, not $270, and when you add the interest, which we're paying, it's $1.76 billion.
Okay.
So
let's go back. We're moving along pretty quickly here.
We believe that the tunnels are facing the same.
Of course they are, and it's inevitable they would be the same thing. And there's the same issue about supply.
Yep.
You know, you cannot force it to rain year by year by year in California. It's a cyclical thing. You have ways of collecting that. The best way is underground in the underground basins, if we can, and that's what we should be doing. But the idea of trying to pump it and have it reliably there to be pumped is not realistic. But let's talk a bit.
Well, the old way of thinking is to throw money at dams and pipes and canals. As you can throw as much money, steel, concrete as you want, but it won't produce one drop more water.
Well, it won't, and there is plenty of water. I mean, we started off, we have to make this as clear as we can. There's
Yes,
plenty of water
there is.
for the people of California.
There is.
It's not that the people will not be able to bathe.
That's right.
You know, people will not run out of water for the necessities and luxuries of their lives.
That's right.
If this happens, 8% to 12% of the water is just used by urban uses. All these urban uses.
Lawns and swimming pools and
Everything.
car washes. Not
So
that I'm advocating,
reducing-
but that's
yeah,
right.
Reducing 25% isn't going to save enough water to do it. So they're going to create a panic. And as we know in the politics
right.
of our nation the last 50 years, or maybe longer, fear is what drives us.
That's right.
And I think, and I've been saying this for a little while, but you know, we now have fear going in this area. People are, you know, Jerry Brown is complicit in this.
He is.
He has told us to be fearful that we're going to dry up in California and blow away if we don't do these extraordinary things, including this extraordinarily absurd,
Tunnel.
environmentally disastrous tunnel. And the reason for that is because they want to grow almonds and alfalfa and other high-profit commercial crops. I've got the note here, a headline from February of 2016. Farmers reap record sales and record drought.
That's right. That's right. That is.
They
just-
have not cut back on their watering or on their growth. They have
No.
not let their fields go fallow.
Almonds are still being planted right now at the height of the drought. They're still planting almond trees.
I saw a number that said that 2 to 4% a year is the growth rate projected for the next 5 years after a huge growth over the last 10 years. They're still not backing down.
No, they're
because
not, because
they
it's too
know
profitable.
It's too profitable.
One of the things that I think will solve the problem of this excess water being diverted by agriculture is we must stop the federal and state subsidies to agriculture.
Wow.
If you don't stop those subsidies and make the water cost what it really costs,
yeah.
they're going to keep wasting it.
Oh, we have this, we cannot possibly touch the convoluted California water system. Senior rights you mentioned a moment ago.
Yes.
Downriver rights, upstream rights, all these arguments about who gets the water. It would be great if we came, and I know there's some effort right now to simplify and prioritize, but the California Constitution does have a provision.
Yes, Article 10, Section 2 against waste and unreasonable use.
So that's a linchpin.
That's one of the linchpins. The second one is the public trust doctrine. And we are very heavily invested in both of those in the court cases that my organization, the California Water Impact
I want
Network.
to help the audience understand that before you get
Yes, okay.
California's Constitution, modified back in the late 1800s, as I recall,
Yeah.
was rewritten to recognize the fact that water was so short in the state.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, okay, you can have water if it's on your property or around your neighborhood or however you get it, but you cannot waste it
Or use it unreasonably.
or use it unreasonably. And there was a public trust involved.
That's right. Well, the
And-
public
and,
trust doctrine actually goes back to the Justinian, to the Roman
Well,
times
but
and
there's- I
English
think-
law.
Yes, but the point being, so people who say, well, I have a property right to water because I brought the land that it's over in that basin, or I brought the line that has a creek going through it, and therefore the rest of you are just going to have to not have any water while I dam up my water.
You can't do that.
You can't do that in California. So there is a hope that we can get a more equitable distribution of the water.
Yes, that's one of our chief goals at the California Water Impact Network. The first thing that I think we want the state to do is to actually quantify how much water they're dealing with in the Delta watershed. Now, the Delta watershed is the San Joaquin, the Sacramento, and the Trinity rivers, and all of their tributaries. It's all of the things, back to that map. It's all of the water that goes into the Delta. The state has never bothered to quantify how much it has, because if it did, then the junior water rights holders, which are the State Water Project, which we know about here, and the Central Valley Project, which is the federal project, would have no water.
Okay, we got the map back on the screen there. You make a reference again to these three rivers that you described.
This is the San Joaquin, and this is the Sacramento, and this is the Trinity River. And all of the little side rivers, the tributaries, so it's all of these rivers, all of them.
And the snowpack coming from the Sierra Nevada
That's
that
right.
feeds all these
That
rivers.
feeds all these rivers, that ends up in the Delta.
Right, and that water is what they're trying to capture before it gets into the bay and pump it north.
Well, it's interesting because the state has never bothered to quantify how much water there is in the Delta watershed. And they've never bothered to quantify how many water rights permits have been issued. You can't manage something as important as water without measuring it. So in my organization, starting in 2009, we spent 3 years through Public Records Act requests and Freedom of Information Act requests, and we did the work that the State Water Resources Control Board should have done. And what we found was shocking. There's on average, in an average year, 29 million acre-feet of consumptive water available, and there's 153.7 million acre-feet of water rights promised. There's
29 million
5.5
available.
That's right, and 153.7. It's 5.5 times.
5 or 6 times higher.
5.5 times more promised.
But that's all over the state. We've had these promises, oversubscription everywhere.
There is oversubscription in the Colorado River as well,
Right.
but the political thing that's really important to understand here is we talked about the senior water rights system. The State Water Project and the Central Valley Project didn't develop their water rights until 1928. They are among the most junior water rights water rights holders in this very oversubscribed system. So if there was an adjudication of the surface waters of the Delta, all hell would break loose, because it would become clear very quickly that the emperor has no clothes. The State Water Project has no water, neither does the Central Valley Project. Those were, very late in the game they came to.
And so
this
the only way
country.
backwards from this, in my opinion, is to, maybe the only way backward, I suspect, the only way I can see clearly, there's only so much conservation, there's only so much savings, there's only so much reuse all the good things that are being done and should be done.
And should be done.
I mean, but when we have, when I've got a number here that a trillion gallons of California water is used annually to grow almonds. A trillion gallons.
10% of all the developed water in California is used to grow almonds.
Yeah, if we had that picture of that almond field up there, I think it would maybe help visualize this. But 10% of the water that's used in agriculture, and this is a new industry. They just discovered this industry.
That's right.
About 30 or 40 years ago.
Not even that long.
Yeah.
It's been about 20 years.
When they first put I-5 up
Mm-hmm.
from Los Angeles to San Francisco, that was just all that empty desert land that used to
That's right.
maybe grow cotton or some other things, but hardly nothing.
What-
They realized that land with water
Mm-hmm.
became extremely valuable. Here we are. That's a picture of
Mm-hmm.
it. And that's flood irrigated often.
Well, and see those are the most junior water rights holders in the system. There's no water to grow those almonds. There really
Right.
isn't.
But
It's
once they get their land and they get the crop in the ground, they start claiming some right to continue to do this.
They can't claim any rights because they're junior water rights holders unless they pump. If they pump overlying, if they own the land and they're pumping from the aquifers beneath their land, that's still legal. But what's happened in the Central Valley is it's what we call a race to the bottom.
Right. Literally
And
to the bottom.
literally a race to the bottom in this side of the Central Valley, the southern side of the Central Valley. And the reason that that's happening is because of the almonds and the other crops. But what's so terrible is that the land has begun to subside.
It has been.
Means that it's collapsing.
And that can be measured, and it's 8, 10, 12 feet in places. And
In
that's
some places, it's as much as 95 feet.
95, you heard that number.
95
Okay,
feet.
we're running toward the end of our time here, so I want to hit a couple points before we go, because I think this is so complicated and so important that people should know it. There used to be a thing, I think, in California called urban preference.
Oh, yes.
So if we can just give people a
Yes.
subject idea. There was a time when people in the urban uses, things that we needed for life,
Yeah.
had a preference over agriculture. What was that? How did that go away?
The urban preference was one of the foundational clauses in the original State Water Project contracts. And in 1994, a secret deal happened in Monterey County called the Monterey Amendments. They came together. And our own Central Coast Water Authority, the Joint Powers Authority that was formed to build our branch of the State Water Project, from the main branch in Kern County to Lake Cachuma. The Central Coast Water Authority was made the lead agency in these Monterey Amendments. Now, what the Monterey Amendments did, the most horrible thing for urban users is it threw out the urban preference.
But let's be clear. There was that was the state of the art. That was the
Yes.
state of the law.
And
what that meant, I mean,
Go
that
ahead.
meant that people in
In
cities
drought.
and people themselves had a preferential right to that water. They
Over
could stop it
agriculture.
being used in agriculture in order to provide it for homes
That's
and
correct.
people. And that got lost in these secret agreements.
That's right. It got thrown out in the secret agreements. And the reason that happened is that in 1991, agriculture got zero water. The urban preference was invoked in the drought of 1991, and people, it worked like it was supposed to. They had to fallow crops you can fallow crops.
You can.
But you can't fallow people. And that's why the urban preference is so important. Well, it got thrown out in the Monterey Amendments or the Monterey Agreement, and that's why CWIN was formed. I was the only member of the public in Buellton when these amendments first surfaced, and I sounded the cry about, my gosh, what are they trying to do to us here? And CWIN was formed in 2001 to be a plaintiff after we won the first case, but went into settlement hearings, and it's a long story. But CWIN was formed to be the plaintiff when the Monterey Amendments came back. We're working on it right now. We filed when it was ripe in 2010. We filed to overturn the Monterey Amendments and get the urban preference back for the people. So that's in court right now as we speak.
Lovely, that's important. I think, I know it's easy to refer to movies like Chinatown or
but that's what it is.
Or Mark Twain or all these, but it's fiction and history in California in this subject area are definitely intertwined.
Oh, definitely.
It's not an area that lends itself easily to human habitation in some parts. You know, certainly Palm Springs and their extravagant use of waters. But all of that aside, there is enough water with all the efforts
Absolutely.
that the state of California and the taxpayers of California and the prior bureaucrats and politicians of California have developed,
Yes.
that it would be more than adequate to meet our needs.
Absolutely. What we have to take out is the greed factor.
Right.
And that's one of the hardest things to do. But there are lots of solutions for California's water problems. And one of them is to stop the flood irrigation
Yeah.
practices. Another is to retire 1 million acres of poison land in the Central Valley that
The
should
tax.
never grow anything. And right now they're growing melons and all kinds of things on it, and we don't know how safe that food is that's being grown there.
I just hope some of the public is aware of what is being described right now by Carolee. There's part of the southern Central Valley that is so full of natural poisons.
It's right. It's the Corcoran clay layer that was laid down when it was all under ocean millions of years
It
ago.
got farmed, and they found out this was producing terrible
Selenium,
selenium
arsenic,
and
molybdenum, it's
and-
terrible.
And still can do it. But, yeah, so if the governor of California would just impose a 25% reduction on the agricultural use.
Absolutely.
As he does on the urban people use, I think we'd be okay right now.
We absolutely would
Right.
be okay.
And people ought to understand this. People in Imperial Valley are growing alfalfa with really cheap water. So
Really
much
cheap
cheaper than you can even imagine our water would be. And what do they do with that alfalfa? They put it on trucks, and they put it in trucks to the harbor, and the harbor puts it on ships, and they send it to China to make milk in China. This is what we're doing without. This is the allocation.
We're exporting our water through alfalfa, we're exporting it through almonds, we're exporting it in ways that do not benefit the people of California.
Right.
And yet the governor is asking the people to cut back by 25%.
And let's say one more number here. It was mentioned earlier, I think, but not to be forgotten. The total agricultural impact of the state of California is 2% of the California
The
gross.
total gross domestic product is 2%. They use 80 to 84% of the water, the consumptive water, and only provide 2% of our gross domestic product.
So we're about to finish up here. I know it went pretty quickly, I
It
think.
did. Thank you, Glenn.
Carolee, is there something you want people to know about your group or what they can do to help?
Well, the California Water Impact Network, you can go to our website. It's c-win.org, and keep going to the website. We're in the process of redoing it right now. We need all the help we can get because we're just a grassroots organization, and we're in there for all of us. And we believe that the only way to really make change in California when it comes to water is through the courts. We know that the public really, it's very difficult.
Thank you. Thank you, Allie. Thank you, Juanita. We're all going to have to move on now. See you all in the next show.